chairs and we'll get started. I will say a quick blessing so that you guys can dig in on that Cobb salad that looks pretty good. Father, thanks for our ability to be here. We invite you into this session. Again, tell you that we love you and just ask that you would give each of us, especially the speakers, just clear, wise words, and everyone else great questions, and just be with us, and we love you. Bless this food. Amen. Okay. I might ask them to close. Can we have them close those doors? Such that they... still get in and close those doors, right?
I just invited my two sons. They didn't sign up.
It's fine.
I figured you'd have
It's fine. Yeah. Okay, guys, find your seats and dig in. I want to begin with a comment and something that I heard from somebody wiser than myself. We tend to use people to get business done as business owners. And Jesus wants us to use business to get people done. And so something to remember and be mindful of. I'm just curious, how many, maybe show of hands, how many of you business owners have chaplains in the business, or a culture of ministry in the business, or a unique culture that you're interested in trying to perpetuate? Okay, helpful to know. What I would say actually is, if you don't have ministry happening in the business, hello, better? How's that? So closer to the face, okay. If ministry is not happening in the business, or you don't plan for ministry to happen in the business, or there's not a really, really unique culture that's important for you to perpetuate, then an ESOP transaction may not actually be right for you, right? You might be better off calling Dwayne and having them sell the company to a secular private equity group and move on. Sounds a little controversial to say that, but it's kind of the truth. If, however, you believe that you are a steward of the business and not an owner of the business, and you either are introducing ministry to the business or a unique culture, or you intend to, it's on your heart, then the last thing that you should do is sell the company to a private equity group. And so I think in this conversation, you'll gather that information. My name is Brandt. I'm a general partner in Perpetuate Capital. My partner Tom, who I think you guys met last night in the middle there, and perpetuate. Also one of the panel speakers. We're going to do a unique format in that rather than me get up and just pontificate about the features and benefits and the advantages and disadvantages of the ESOP, I figured let's hear from three men who ran sizable businesses and believers, and after praying about it, elected to go down this path of the ESOP structure. And specifically, I've asked them to each talk about what were you thinking about, what were you praying about before you made that decision. One. Two, how important was the amount of cash that you needed to receive from the liquidity event that is the ESOP transaction? How important was that? And then thirdly, what's life look like now, years later, after you've done it? Each of them have a unique story, and I know they'll all tell their own individual unique stories and what was going on during and before, during, and after the ESOP transaction. So we'll do that. It's a tight time format. I want to really respect your time. Try to keep this, to an hour. There'll be ample time. There's free time after this, so there's ample time for Q&A. I would encourage you to write your questions down and then pose them to the panelists after the three of them have told their stories. And then for those, some of you have come up to me and expressed interest in maybe like a little deeper dive on exactly how the ESOP transaction works. That will not be covered in this formal hour panel discussion, because I want you to hear from them, hear their stories. But we'll stay afterwards, and I've got a slide that I can show those that are interested in doing maybe a deeper dive. So we'll have that on the back end. With that, I'm going to throw it to you, Glenn, to tell us your story.
Thank you, Brandt. I think this one's hot. Okay. So my name's Glenn Knopp, and my company that we had was called Inland Tarp. I want to give you a little bit of background about myself, and then also how I got to the ESOP. I grew up on a hay, grain, and livestock ranch. After graduating high school in '74, I continued the family farm tradition by becoming an eighth-generation U.S. farmer. In 1978, I started selling a few haystack covers to fellow hay growers. In 1990, I moved into full-time sales and business, expanded into manufacturing and other products. By 2010, I'm moving along pretty quickly here, we were selling haystack covers, environmental containment liners, and fabric building covers internationally. Over the following 10 years, things grew really exponentially, and I divided the company into three areas to focus. And so we had three companies, and during those years, I relied heavily upon God to teach me how to grow successful companies. Again and again, I could tell you stories where I didn't know what to do, but I prayed and sought God on it, and after a while, the right direction became apparent. Sometimes it was even through the advice of 2 or 3 advisors. The first question that I'm going to respond to is, what was God telling you as you prayed through your stewardship of Inland? Well, first and foremost, Inland Tarp was dedicated to God. I realized my skills were limited, and without His help, I could fail to steward His business well. And we didn't go over this beforehand, so I'm on the same page as Brandt. In a way, I think fear of failure motivated me somewhat to stay focused on Him. I didn't want to fail at stewarding well the resources that He entrusted to me. From the start, I was determined to treat people like I would want to be treated, to follow the golden rule. And for example, this accountants oftentimes don't find this very intuitive, but we paid vendors early whenever we could. What we found is this helped win favor with them, and when there's a shortage of supply, Guess who got the product? Not all the time, but it really did help. And they knew that they were going to get paid on time, and rush orders were oftentimes filled pretty quickly. About 2010, we introduced servant leadership and business as missions to our culture, and it really started to change our company for the better. We learned to serve others with the humility of Jesus. We wrote up biblically based core values and subsequently followed them fairly closely. This gave us a strong common group identity that our customers and vendors appreciated. They knew who we were. They knew if somebody, one of the employees, did something that didn't align with that, they felt free to tell us that. Although not everyone were Christians, even the ones that weren't could see the improvement in culture, and they liked working in that environment. So many people would come in and say, you know, I used to work, I worked at a lot of places, but I've never been in a place like this. And so I give God the credit for that. That's a wonderful environment. I facilitated an early Tuesday morning Bible study with prayer in our conference room for those who wanted to attend. Several times visitors coming in would say, I always like coming here because it's so peaceful. Sometimes that gave us an opportunity to share Jesus. Our company leaders who were close to the financials could see that we had good profits. It also helped when they could see that most of the profit went back into capital improvements to grow the company, increasing inventories as sales increased, bonuses and charitable donations, but not into my pocket just to spend lavishly. I had a payout later. At the end, we'll get into that. So we had a profit-sharing plan for key people, but most of the daily production workers weren't beneficiaries of it yet. For years, I felt the strong desire to reward all the employees because they sacrificed so much with long hours and crazy schedules to satisfy our customers' demands. Multiple times, I looked at giving a percentage of ownership to the employees, but in the end, it seemed too complicated. Several times I received offers to sell the company, but I didn't feel God's peace. And yet, as I approached 60 years of age, I started looking more diligently into what my exit strategy might be. One of the advantages to selling to a PE firm was that I could cash out and invest the money somewhere else, although they might want to keep me on the string for a few years. But the risk of the business falling apart and the team not having a business to operate in the future held me back. It seemed like most private equity buyers were more focused on profit than serving employees, vendors, or customers. This was a problem to me. Serving well was part of the secret sauce that made us successful. We treasured our team, which included all our employees, our vendors, and our customers. We were like a family. And it was my desire to leave employees with the tools and the resources to have long-term employment opportunities continue. As I looked at the ESOP, the benefits of selling to the ESOP that were attractive to me were that there would be no leadership changes that might cause a loss of key employees or disrupt our culture and open the door for a competitor to take advantage of that moment in time. I could also make sure that the companies would not be undercapitalized. I would still have some influence as board chair to help the new employee company thrive. But when I looked at forming a healthy ESOP, but there was a few years before we actually did that, I was moving that direction. There were several things, though, that I found were lacking. Number one was a strong CEO who shares our values. Really, I was the guy, and while I had some great people under me, I didn't have anybody that had the long-term strategic view as well as the ability to develop people. So, also we were missing good guidance on setting up the ESOP successfully, and enough capital reserves for the company to continue to operate in my absence. We were close, but not quite there. So what I did was hire a fractional CEO who was a strong leader, a strong Christian leader also, consulted with great people to set up the ESOP, focused on how to do the sale to the ESOP at a price that would allow me to take out some cash and have strong assurance of being paid a fair price for carrying the note. In the second quarter of 2020, I felt the Holy Spirit speaking to me, now's the time. So I pulled the trigger. In May, we started the process of forming the ESOP. Later, we put the 3 companies into a holding company and then sold them to the ESOP on November 1st, 2020, almost 4 years ago. The second question, was cash liquidity at closing a factor in your decision, why or not? Yes, cash was a factor. I wanted to get a substantial amount in cash. But something I learned was, if I would settle for 5% of the sale price in cash, which is roughly about what I did, I would be able to get an exceptional price on the whole company with a good interest rate on a note, monthly payments, and be able to continue as board chair, offering some influence on the future of the company. Also, I would receive a second bite of the apple by receiving a substantial warrant of shares once the note was paid off. I learned as long as the company, this is something else I learned that's pretty cool. As long as the company makes money, having good cash flow to pay the seller's note isn't that difficult with a sub-S corp, because a sub-S corp doesn't pay any income taxes. The taxes become the responsibility of the employees who pay them when they sell their stock back to the company. So that really helps cash flow, and the money that would normally be paid out in taxes can go to cover the seller's note. The third question, in retrospect, was it the right decision? So after nearly 4 years of operating an ESOP, this is how things are today. The CEO and the GM still invite my input. My role as Chief Visionary Officer and Board Chair. It takes me no more than 4 hours average per week to do that. Our core values are still being followed. Company culture is very strong. Employees are very motivated. Approximately 40% of the promissory seller's note has been paid off. Yay. Stock prices are quickly rising, meaning the employee shareholders are building equity for their retirement in addition to the 401ks that they have. And this year, it hasn't been announced. In fact, it's going to be a significant increase in stock price, so that's really cool for the employees. The ESOP model provides exciting opportunities also for expansion through mergers and purchases and mergers. We've already done one merger, and that's 2 years later. It's been very successful. Our CEO and most key employees are still leading the company. My customers are very happy with continued excellent service, and actually it took us up another notch with our vendors. Our vendors are very impressed with the strength of our company, and they compete to get our business. I mean, more than ever before. There's things they're able to do for us now that they didn't do before, so that's pretty cool. Bottom line, I'm very happy with my decision to sell to an ESOP.
I'm so glad you said that. Because truth.
Are there any questions for me, or do you want to wait on questions till the end?
Take two. Maybe we'll take two
Two
questions
quick
each, and then put
questions
the rest
if
of
you
it.
have some.
Full disclosure: I did not know. I have not asked them to give me the answers to these questions before I put them up on a panel discussion. So I don't know what they're going to say.
Did I do okay?
You did great.
Yes.
How did the valuation of the ESOP compare to what was offered to private equity?
It was higher.
It was higher.
Yeah, I was surprised, but it was higher.
The
Probably
question,
about
the question was,
10%
how was
higher.
the valuation selling to the ESOP? How did it compare to private equity bids? And it was higher.
Yes.
What size of the company were you at the point at which you sold?
I think we were around $42, $45 million in sales at that time. Is that what you mean, or? I don't know. I don't remember. Yeah, I think we were 5.5 or 6 times EBITDA.
Yeah, I think you were. I think he was like in the 15 to 20% EBITDA margin range at that time.
It was seasonal, so full-time employees, we had about 150. If you included the contract workers, that some of them work as much as 7 or 8 months, probably 350.
More questions will arise as you listen to these stories, so there'll be, again, time at the end. John, tell us your story.
Yeah, glad to be here. Yeah, my name's John Houston. We had a home building company called John Houston Homes. We were doing about $400 million at the time of sale. I think at the time we were 86th largest home builder in the U.S. And a friend of mine actually had just got into negotiations to sell his company, and who was about the same size we were at the time. And so he actually introduced us. We had been talking a little bit about selling, but not a whole lot. He introduced us to the people that were buying his company because they were interested in ours. And it kind of sent my wife and I down this path of just wrestling through, God, what do you want? We're firm believers. I didn't do it the right way the first time when I was young, about 30 years ago, and lost everything we had, filed bankruptcy, lost everything but our house. And coming out of that is when I committed to the Lord. Psalms 24:1 that says the earth and everything, including its people, are God's. So I said, me and God, from here on out, whatever you tell me to do, which is following John chapter 10 that says my sheep will know my voice and follow me. We say, whatever you want, God, just lead us and direct us. It's all yours. We just want to steward it to the best of our ability. And that's kind of where we found ourselves. We had an opportunity for a pretty big cash out. Because the market was still really good. We had tons of lots in front of us, a lot of opportunity. If I remember right, we had about 185 employees at the time. But probably the biggest thing we were wrestling with at the time is that the whole reason why we had started, we have currently still have 7 companies, and the whole reason why we had started every company was for 2 reasons, and that was to reach people for Christ and give to the kingdom. And so our biggest wrestling was if God, we sell this company and we get $100+ million in cash, then what? And God gave me 4 things. He said, here's the 4 things I want you to do for the rest of your life. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and go and make disciples, baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey. And I was like, okay, God, what does that have to do with home building? Right? And he's like, it has everything to do with home building, because home building and every business I've given you is simply the vehicle that I'm using for you to accomplish those 4 things. And so I was like, okay, so you're going to have to help me understand this a little bit more. And about that time, my wife and I had some other friends that were named Beat and Bow Homes that were in Lubbock. And I think it's Lubbock, Midland, Odessa area. And they started telling us about what's called a PBC. Have you all ever heard of a PBC? It stands for Public Benefit Corporation. And what a public benefit corporation allowed us to do was actually put in the bylaws before we sold the company. The company was in business to reach people for Christ and give to the kingdom. And so at the time of sale, that couldn't change. And so that gave us a lot more peace. And so as we began to look at the different options, we have 2 kids. Neither one of our kids were interested in running the home building business or really being very involved in it all. I was getting closer to 50 and trying to figure out what I was going to do long term. And besides be a serial entrepreneur, which is what I still am. And so God just really started putting all the pieces together. That's about the time we met Brandt and those guys. And they just really helped us put it together. And through prayer, one of the things that God really started laying on my heart was legacy. We sell, we do a big transaction, we give off the profits, and then we have to figure out where are we going to invest that money, and now how are we going to multiply that money so we can reach more people for Christ and give more to the kingdom. And through that prayer, God kind of gave us this vision he said, here's an option. You could actually, because we didn't feel like God told us yes or no, you can't sell to a for-profit. He just said, here's another option. And the ESOP was the other option. And he said, I want you to sell it to him at a discount because I've already taken great care of you. You already probably have more than you need in the first place, but you're still going to be blessed, right? And so for my wife and I, we were okay with that. And we said, but how do we make it more purposeful? And so what God started showing us was with that one, and this is just us. I'm not telling anybody else in here what to do. This is just what God spoke to us. With one transaction, which would be the close of the business, we would be able to give significantly to the kingdom. Because at the time we were giving around 30% of our profits off the business, about 50% personally. And so we came to that point, and he's like, you can make a big impact. You can make one big splash, right? Or you could sell the business to the employees, and over a 10-year period, teach them biblical stewardship as owners, because that it will shift for them and help them understand what it means to be stewards of God's business. And the thing I wrestled with was I estimated that probably only about 50% of our staff were believers. And God was like, it doesn't matter, the biblical principles still work. So teach them leadership, teach them biblical stewardship, and when the opportunity comes up, share the gospel with them, which is what we always did anyway. And so anyway, we put a 10-year plan in place of how we could actually teach that to our staff. We're rolling the next phase of it out this year, actually, phase 3. We're going into the 5th year of our ESOP sale. And man, to see the growth in our leaders has just been crazy. The spiritual growth, because if you know much about home building, you know, one of the things that has happened, I mean, coming out of COVID, I mean, it was record years. I mean, we could not sell houses fast enough. But when that bubble began to shift, our staff and our leaders had never actually had to go through, I wouldn't even say it's a down market, it's a normal market, because our business was double and triple what it should have been through COVID in sales and profitability in every aspect. And so normal meant instead of doing almost 700 houses a year, they were back down to about 400. And so that was a big shift. And so they came to me one day and they said, hey, man, we're not going to be able to make the full ESOP payment. Is it okay if we defer part of that payment? And I was like, sure. This was like in 21, 22. And I was like, yeah, no problem. 23, they came in and they said, hey, we're going to need to defer that, you know, we'll make all the interest payments, but we're going to have to defer part of the principal payment again. Is that okay? And I remember going to my prayer closet and I was like, I'm just going to be honest. I don't know anybody in this room, but I was like, what the crap, God? I was like, how is this fair? And I was wrestling with God with it, you know, and he was like, just trust me. So I go back to him and I say, yeah, that's fine. You know, we'll make it work. And my wife is still the CIO there, still to this day. And they came in and they said, hey, we were also wondering if we could defer Tracy's pay for a year, you know, and would that be okay? Well, that was primarily what we were living off of, right? Because we didn't pull a whole lot of money out of any business. And so I went back to my prayer closet and I was like, dude, did you not get the first message, God? You know, what the crap, dude? Like, there's got to be a new plan here. And he was like, no, trust me. And he gave me peace. Literally about 30 days later, they said, hey, we know you're chairman of the board and you're a senior consultant. Would it be possible for us to defer that payment? And so, you know, within 3 years of us doing the ESOP note, it had been cut in half. Our pay had gone to zero. And I went to my prayer closet and I was like, God, there's not one piece of this that makes sense. We prayed about it. We sought wise counsel about it. And we did what we felt like you told us to do. So why am I having to go through this pain and suffering? And you know what God's response was? He said, because I love you. I love you, I love you, I love you. And I want them to know how much I love them. He said, son, you have to realize I've taken incredible care of you. And it's not about the money, it's about the people. And he said, do you understand? If this would have been a for-profit sale, they would not have the opportunity to walk through this with a spiritual lens, with a lens of Christ that will push them to the Lord. You have an opportunity to actually be salt and light to them and guide them through the process. And he said, I got one other question for you. You asked me, and I felt like the Lord said, you asked me, why do I have to go through all this pain? And he said, son, I've got one simple question for you, is why did I have to go through all that pain? And he said, do you understand? I didn't have to go to the cross. I chose to go to the cross, even though I knew the pain and the suffering and the cost that it was going to be to me. And he said, now I just have this last question for you. Was it worth it? And it changed my whole perspective on the ESOP. And since then, we sold our mortgage company as an ESOP too. You know, and I look back at that and I'm like, you know what? And Brandt, I know we didn't talk about this, but here's what I can tell you. If this is what God tells you to do, yours may be easy and it might sail through. Or it might be like mine and be a lot more challenging. But here's what I can tell you. I have not ever tasted and seen God in the way that I've been able to taste and see God in this process. He's reminded me over and over again of his goodness and his mercy and his grace. And when I have other leaders on the home building company staff that are now discipling people, that are discipling their own kids and their own families, and they're going, what can we do to give more to the kingdom? And they're putting their own money in the game, the kingdom game. What value is that in dollars that I could put in my bank account? But yet I'm still crazy blessed because God's blessed us financially, but he's also blessed us with a whole nother level of relationship with Christ that I didn't have before. And so for me personally, the last question being, do I regret it? I don't regret it at all. Because to be part of that, I look back at that and I'm like, man, what would I have missed? Right? I would have missed seeing hundreds of families' lives being changed and them getting to taste God, not just in great markets, but in tough markets where you have no other option but to go to your prayer closet and say, God, what are we supposed to do? And these are the leaders, right? Because when they come to me and say, and ask me, what did you do when the market was bad? I say, man, I'd get in my prayer closet. I'd pray and ask God. Many times I'd fast and pray over houses. I'd bring our staff in and pray and fast over houses. And now I get to hear about the fasting and praying that they're doing over houses. I get to see the fasting and prayer that they're doing in 30-day tranches and the growth that's come out of that and how now they've incorporated that into their own lives at home. And you want to talk about what God originally told us about the next generation of leaving a legacy is now these people are learning how to steward, not just own, right? So on paper, they're owners, but they're learning how to be stewards of what God is entrusting to them. And man, I just look at it and I get excited because I'm like, man, the foundation that God is building in their life. Although there's days where I'm like, it'd be a whole lot easier for me if I'd have just got the cash. Every time I go back to my prayer closet, God's like, but would the eternal reward be the same? And anyway, that's my story. And my wife, is a huge believer in what we get to do, because we're just reminded that, Christ came to serve, not be served. And he came to give, not receive. And what a good God we have that he actually allows us to do both. And before I wrap up, when I was praying for this event, I did sense that the Holy Spirit really wanted me just to encourage you guys. I don't know if it's one person or multiple people in here, but I think you do need to, I think some people in this room are very tired and weary and doing good. And I just sensed that the Lord was saying, don't be tired and weary. Lay it at my feet. But remember, it's all because I love you. And I felt like he specifically said, just remember Jesus, when Jesus was being baptized and God said, I love you. I love you. I love you. And I'm pleased with you. And I sense there's people in this room that God wants you to hear him say that to you today. Because all these businesses are awesome. And it's awesome that we get to be part of it. But without his love, it's all meaningless. None of it matters. Right? But with his love, we can change the world. So anyway.
Thank you, John.
Before
questions?
Are there any questions for John?
Can you talk a little bit more about the program that you've laid out for your employees? I'm really encouraged by long-term stewardship mindset, especially for those that become owners. They're going to have the responsibility to steward. So what is it a personal development, professional plan?
Yeah, it's a great question. So for probably 15 years, we have a model that our chief ministry officer came up with that's called SEAM. And you think about it as a funnel. And the S stands for strengthen. The E is equip. The A is activate. And the M is multiply. And so we believe we have to strengthen our employees. So we have to meet them where they are and add value to their lives, both as professionals and as individuals. And so that's where a lot of that takes place so like what we have right now is we have 36 lessons of leadership lessons that are taking new ground. For example, how how to negotiate deals. They're all, but every one of them are biblically based. We actually got that's a combination of some stuff we created, some stuff that Maxwell created, John Maxwell, and then some stuff that Kingdom Business Leaders Network created. And then we have, I'm just really, really blessed with an incredible writer on staff. And so she rewrote all of that and took the Christianese out of it, if that makes sense. And so the way we do it is the curriculum actually is all anybody, non-believer or believer, any HR department could actually mandate that somebody goes through this material. But what we do is we have an option that you can opt in to the spiritual application piece. And what we found is that about 75% of our staff actually opt in. So whether they're believers or whether they're not, they want to know where did this actually come from. So they actually opt into the material, and that's when it goes much deeper into the spiritual aspects. But we do that because we feel like we have to earn the right. We have to add value to their life where they are, set them up for more success in every aspect of their life. And so that's one example. And so we have 36 months of curriculum that they'll go through and that they'll be going through. We've already done this with two other lessons that we've done. So we've been building each session, each year on top of each other, if that makes sense. I don't know if that helps. Yeah. With real quick, the strengthen, equip, activate, and multiply. If you think about that, we strengthen. In other words, we add value to them. When they opt in, that's when they come into the equip. Now we're going to equip you with the things of God, His Word, loving, serving, all those opportunities. So that's where we do mission trips that they get to take. They can actually take time off to do that. Then the next stage is the activate, and those are the people that actually may come in and actually lead those groups because their lives have been impacted enough that now they're like, hey, I want to be part of that. And then the multiply is they're not only doing it internally, but they're doing it externally. So
John wrote a book, and there's a bunch of the copies of the book out on where all the high tops are, and you see the perpetuate sign that you can scan and get information or QR code, but below there are a bunch of John's books that you guys are welcome to grab. One quick thing, Tom, before I throw it to you. I did talk to John before when I asked him to do this talk. He said, man, I don't know if you want me to do the talk because you kind of gave me the story. I said, man, we're not trying to sell anything. We're just trying to educate people, and there's some new realities that exist thanks to God helping us with this fund. And says this is education. This is not trying to sell anybody. They need to hear the stories. It doesn't need to be all, wonderful. Let's hear truth. So John, thank you for being willing to come out and do that.
And if those books are gone from the top, there's another box of them below. So we'll get those out and make sure that if any of you want to read more about John's story, it's a great story. And thank you for writing that, and thank you for coming and sharing that with us. My name is Tom Mallon, and I was a founder and CEO of an ambulatory surgery business in Chicago called Regent Surgical Health. We started the business in 2001, April Fool's Day, actually, of 2001. We started it with 12 partners. We didn't take any outside capital. We all pulled out of our checkbooks and our pockets and wherever hole in the wall, we kept our cash to start the company. I was the largest shareholder, but not the majority shareholder. The 15 years that we worked together to build the company, we started with zero, and we ended up building or buying 32 ambulatory surgery centers located from Alaska to Florida. And initially we started with doctor partnerships. Then due to the change of contracting and insurance consolidation in the country, the insurance companies weren't paying us enough to stay in business, so we started bringing in hospital partners. By 2015, we had a very strong management team. We had, of the 32 centers that we bought or built, we had sold off 8 of those. So we had 24 active centers at the time. When we sold a center, usually a hospital would want, they would want to take over the center to broaden their market services. So we would have a fountain of money coming out from these sales. So we had distributed, a factor of maybe 20 times our initial capital in the business. So it was a very profitable, interesting business. Working with doctors and working with hospitals challenged us every day. And I was a member of a Christian CEO roundtable that wasn't FCCI. And from that experience was able to really start doing ministry in the business. We had prayer teams. We had corporate chaplains that served our people. We had mission trips, and it was everything in my view was clocking like it should. However, I made a strategic error in building our management team. I age discriminated. I only hired old people. And as they got older, they wanted out. And several of them had done very well with the business, but still we had a lot of value locked up in the equity of the business. So 2 of my partners controlled 35% of the business, were over 70 years old. I had recruited a wonderful younger man, he was about 50, to be my successor. I was about 60 at the time. And he and I were going to take the company to market to recap it. We were going to look at ESOP. We were going to look at private equity. We were going to look at a strategic sale. And on Mother's Day in May, I come back from a fishing trip, and my phone is lighting up like a pinball machine. My 50-year-old partner has died on the path training for his next marathon. So the best laid plans, this is when I kind of threw up my hands and I said, Lord, this is your company. What are you doing with it? Now, the only thing about that particular man, he was well known in our industry. He ran our industry association. He was a lawyer. He was not a committed Christian. But he had been with us for 10 years, and he was a 10% owner in the company, and I felt he was going to be a good steward. But the Lord had other ideas for us. And so during the next 6 months, I did a very lame marketing effort. We did go into letter of intent with a company that we never sold to. I recruited another, I should tell the story about my first CEO. COO. So when he was COO and going to be CEO, I said, okay, you have a choice. You've never been CEO before. You have to join a CEO roundtable. And I said, I'm involved in X group. It was C12, for those of you who know it. And I said, you can either go to C12 or Vistage. And he said, he went to both, and he came back to me and he says, I think I want to be in Vistage. I said, fine, great. You got to do this. Then he passed away. The next guy that I recruited started in November. It was a guy I knew for 5 years, and he was a strong Christian guy. And I said, okay, you have a choice. You've never been CEO before. You can either choose C12 or you can choose Vistage. But just so you know, the last guy I gave that choice to, he chose Vistage and he died within a week. So that was one point of levity in this awful time, this awful season. Basically, we then hired an investment bank. The investment bank looked at the private equity options, they looked at the strategic options, and they found a strategic buyer. Our second largest vendor was a company called Medtronic in Minneapolis, and they wanted to buy our business because they wanted to learn how the surgery center business worked compared to, they were very successful with hospitals. They were marginally successful selling to surgery centers because we got paid less and we could afford to pay them less and all this. So the CEO the new guy who chose C12, and he lived to fight another day, he and I and the CFO researched the ESOP. And we didn't have Brandt to take us through this. I didn't know Brandt at the time, but we did end up answering all of my CFO's objections to the ESOP, and he had a litany of them. You've got to sell cheaper than you sell to the market. You're going to expose yourself to Labor Department audits. All kinds of things that none of which were true. And it was the more we found out, the more we realized we were an ESOP from the very beginning. We had 12 partners who ran the company from the very beginning, and we were all owners. And so we understood the culture of that, and we were comfortable with it. So how important was cash at closing? Very important. When you have guys in your partnership who aren't buying green bananas, who are only buying green bananas, you need to get cash to them. Now, the ESOP, we could shield it through a 1042 exclusion similar to a 1031 in real estate. And so they were willing to finance 25% of their take home in an employee note. Basically, they were reinvesting their tax bite into the company to create an asset for their family, which was a great thing. We had the bank that was in for 25%. So we had this hole in the middle. After I finally decided that the ESOP was the right direction, and that was I had to know that it was the best financial deal for everybody, and it was the best fit for the employees and the customers. My C12 chair kept asking me, what's the best option for you to go through to further the ministry of your business? And I kept arguing with him. I kept saying, that's not the question. I got these old guys that I need to get them the most money possible. And at the end of the day, it became very apparent. It was the ESOP was the best cash option at closing, the best long-term option with the seller notes, and it was the best thing for the ministry and the business. And that turned out to be very true. So now I had to find the middle piece of financing, and this is where I learned the beauty of aligned capital. So our investment banker went out and got 4 options for mezzanine debt. Mezzanine debt is a den of thieves. For small, private, profitable companies, they wanted to charge us 12% current with amortization, 2% accrued every year, and then 30% of the upside of the business over a 7-year period. And I looked at that, and the sellers I'd convinced all the sellers to go for an 8% loan, interest only, for 7 years, and whatever benefit that the trustee would give us on the upside, they gave us 32%. So that was fine, and everybody was okay with that. So I got 4 calls from our doctor partners. Now, we had 400 doctor partners in these 24 centers. And they were yelling at me. They did not want us to sell to a large corporate buyer. They didn't want us to change. They wanted us to keep doing exactly what we're doing. And I said, but we have this problem. We have this financing problem. They said, well, what do you need? And I said, we need $11 million at 8% with warrants at the end. They said, well, we'll do that. We'll invest in that. I'm like, okay, why? They said, well, we don't get fair deals from Wall Street. We know you guys. We trust you guys. You've made a lot of money for us. We'll reinvest it back in the company. So I went on the road, and in 30 days, I visited 72 of our 400 partners. 42 of them wrote checks for $11 million, and we were able to close before the end of 2016. So it was, and that alignment of capital at a lower than market interest rate is what motivated me to want to. I felt called immediately, like literally in January after closing in December. I thought, what's my next? What does God want me to do next? I felt him say to me, find Christian capital providers who are willing to invest in Christian-owned businesses to perpetuate the culture and the ministry of those businesses. And very quickly, I met Brandt, and he found he had the same call, and that's what we have been doing. Interrupted by COVID, and we look at ups and downs. We've had our ups and downs with this process, but we still feel that it is the right thing to do, and we're excited that you all are here to hear the story.
Any questions for Tom before I make a couple of comments? No. It's important to note that, well, actually, so I want you to think about a 3-layer wedding cake. The top layer is what a bank would loan the company. The middle layer of that wedding cake is what a junior capital provider would lend. Think of it like a second mortgage. Somebody would lend, take a little bit more risk, lend, even though they know the bank has all the collateral. And then the third layer of that wedding cake are us as sellers, so we would carry back a note. So that's how every type of transaction gets financed, whether it's an ESOP or not. Think of a 3-layer wedding cake. And it's interesting to know, I think, that both Glenn and John, the amount of liquidity, cash on the barrelhead that they took out at the sale was limited to whatever excess cash was on the balance sheet and what a bank would be willing to lend, and what they were comfortable, even though the bank might be willing to lend a lot, what they were comfortable with borrowing. And then the rest, so in that case, for Glenn and John, it was a 2-layer wedding cake. It was whatever the bank would lend, and then the rest was a big slice of cake that was a seller note you've heard them talk about, where they're going to get paid out over time, which is easier to do because the company stops, the profits of the business are no longer taxed at a federal or state level ever again. So taxation stops entirely and it stops permanently. So it's a safer company to carry back a note from or lend money to. Tom's case, he couldn't do that. I mean, he had these people that had to get a certain amount of liquidity, and so he was facing the option that most people have to face, which is, I've got to go sell this to a private equity group because they'll write a check. So the private equity group will go get the bank loan themselves, and then they'll write a check themselves, and that's how most people get most of the cash at close. And so Tom uniquely and creatively solved that through his doctor partners, his aligned capital, as he terms it. So it used to be, and I mentioned this last night, I'll sort of say this and then be quiet for questions, but it used to be, prior to the Lord helping Tom and I and our partners get this fund raised, that if you sell to the ESOP, you can sell at the same valuation. So you're not making a sacrifice in terms of what you're selling the business for to that trust, but the amount of cash that you're going to clear on the barrelhead is limited to what a bank would lend. There's no before we did this, there was no fund in existence that would look at that and say, okay, now we'll additionally lend money to this ESOP trust, so that now, between that first layer of the wedding cake and the second layer of the wedding cake, you add those two up, that amount of cash that's lent to the ESOP and then buys your stock, that's the same amount of cash that you would get if you sold to the private equity group. So the whole objective has been, how do we level the dollars so that you don't have to pray about, like these men did, pray about selling the company and not getting as much cash at close as you could if you sold to a private equity group, the vast majority of which are secular and are going to tell you what you want to hear, and then they're going to kill all the ministry components of the business. So it really is kind of a game changer in that now any company that a private equity group would be interested in buying, you guys can sell to this employee trust, and coupled with our capital, get the same amount of cash that you would get if you sold out to somebody else. And we can help solve those succession planning issues also. So that's, yeah, open Q&A.
This is really interesting. This is the first I've ever heard of this, so I really appreciate this. On the risk side, So, my question is, on the risk side, I mean, it seems like if you have a private equity group that comes in, they write the check, you're done. Is there like an increased risk you're dealing with because the employees have it, and if the company goes under, company goes bad, how big is there additional risk, and if so, how big is that risk historically for companies that have gone this route?
There's no more risk to the new owners of the business than there would be to the private equity group. The private equity group is going to finance when a private equity group comes and buys your company, they're doing the exact same thing that I just described. They're going to borrow money, senior, top, middle, and then they're going to write a check themselves. And so what the company looks like after it sells to the ESOP compared to what it looks like after it sells to the private equity group is the same. It's just a matter of, are you going to let them do that, cede control, get that cash, and move on? Or are you willing to study algebra for a week and understand a little bit of the math and literally do it yourself? And so the risk profile is exactly the same. In fact, I would argue that it's less in the ESOP structure, because when a private equity group buys the business, that company is still paying taxes. When you sell 100% of the business to the employee trust, taxation, by law, taxation on those profits at the federal level and at the state level stops entirely and permanently. So every dollar of profit that you generate in the business from that point forward stays in the enterprise. And so it's a safer business to finance because of that.
Brandt, if I could just add to that, one of the concerns I had as a seller initially was, well, what if the employees decide that they're going to go, spend the money in a foolish way, and I don't get paid, right? That sort of thing. And what I asked that question several times because I was concerned, of course, that whether I get my money. What I learned was that as the board chair, I still had a significant amount of influence in that I hired the CEO, and I could let the CEO go as long as if something's going out of whack. And there's a trustee that's representing the employees, and any major plans that were come up really had come from the leadership side, and then if it was going to be might affect the employees negatively, we'd have to take it to the trustee. Now, fortunately, our trustees, I think everything's gone really well, and our trustees said yes, except for one time when we were looking at phantom shares versus stock appreciation rights, and then there was wait a minute, let's talk about this. But other than that, it's gone well.
And I would say, if you're, lost, this is America, and anybody can be sued for anything. So your question on risk is, what if the business tanks, and do the employees have the right to sue? First of all, just like John described, the chance of that company tanking when there's a substantial seller equity and seller participation in the business, they defer. Like we got hit with COVID. The government closed our businesses for 6 weeks. We had the right to defer payments to the investors and to the sellers. And we did that one quarter where we paid out at 2% per quarter, but if we deferred it, it accrued at 2.5%. So there was a penalty for not paying currently. So we had already in our documents said if we hit a speed bump, we want to be able to do it without a lot of angst. And it was only one quarter, and it worked out fine. But the seller really has the right to, he has the relief valve. If the company goes bad, he has the relief valve to help make it through. So.
Two things I want to hit. I know you've got a question, but two things I want to hit. One, and I'm stealing thunder from a slide for those that want to really do the deeper dive later, but most people do. You sell all or part of your stock to the trust, the ESOP trust. You are retaining control, voting control of the board of directors of the corporation. So it's not like the employees have control of the business in any way. It's no different than the way your business works now. The board of directors hires and fires management, and so you can sell all your liquidity to the trust, and you're retaining voting control of the board of directors. So all hiring and firing, culture, all this is total control of the corporation is retained, despite the fact that you sold your stock. The second thing I want to say is that, you know how we have family trusts? We put our assets in a family trust, and our kids and our grandkids are the beneficiaries of those trust dollars. The kids can't get their hands on those assets and make buy-sell decisions. They just get money from the trust the way the trust agreement reads. A pretty basic concept that most of us are all familiar with. That is exactly what this is. It is an employee trust, and the employees don't need to have any money. They have no say in whether you bless them with this or not. They don't ever hold the shares themselves. They don't vote the shares. They are beneficiary. They will slowly vest into becoming, key term, beneficiaries of the dollar value of the stock, not the actual stock. So it costs them nothing. So you sell your stock at the same price you could sell it to a third party for. You get paid. Now, because of our fund, you get paid the same amount of cash on the barrelhead that you would receive if you sold to the private equity group. And now these employees, at no cost to them, they just have to continue to work for the business, be loyal, and they will slowly vest into becoming beneficiaries of the dollar value of that stock, such that when they terminate, 5 years later, the trust or the corporation uses its cash, which builds up quickly when you don't have to pay 30 to 50% away to the government. You have to use that cash to redeem that stock back out of their retirement account that's been kind of allocated to them from an accounting perspective. That's how they get cash, just like from a 401k distribution. They pay taxes, and that stock is recycled and reused for the next generation of employees. So each company, there's so much flexibility. Each company approaches it differently. Sometimes there's an immediate shift of leadership away from the sellers to succession. Sometimes the ESOP transaction happens, and that succession change happens over 5 years. I've got clients that have did it 12 years ago, and they're still operating the business. They just set in motion this mechanism to liquefy what was otherwise illiquid to kind of get their affairs in order. So there's no necessarily one way to do it. There's lots of flexibility. And what I would emphasize is that you can retain control of that corporation as long as you want to, which is really key.
Now I actually get two. So first, and this is truly asking, unfortunately, for a friend. Great family business. My friend passed. His brother's now running the company, but he knows he's going to be transitioning. If you needed to put an interim, a CEO leadership in place because there's a long gap between, you get where I'm going with that. What can you do do you all just do that?
Just like every private equity group in the world solves that problem when they buy a business, not rocket science, right? You go run a market process, you get a slate of candidates, and you replace management with the best people you possibly can. We don't bring that play to the table as part of our investment. We defer to you. If you want our help in solving for succession, we'll roll our sleeves up and we'll jump in and help solve that problem. Because we realize that you're not going to work forever, and we'll help you solve that. And it's in our interest to help you solve that collectively. But we're not coming in, we're the antithesis of private equity groups. Private equity groups want to come in, buy control of the stock, get majority seats on the board, dictate pace, flip, sell. This is the antithesis. We never own one share. We're lending the money to the ESOP trust. In addition to what the bank will do, that's the money that buys your stock, and we're staying out of your hair. You want us to help solve CEO or CFO succession? We will absolutely help you, but you have to ask us to do that. We're not going to come in and dominate the business.
Thank you. And if no one else minds, last question. If post this, whatever amount of time, growth capital is needed to be raised?
Even more attractive to us. Yes. Yeah. As capital providers, we would much rather lend money to the trust and have that money go to grow the business than to see it go unproductively out to liquidity. Yeah, so very excited about those kinds of situations.
A couple things to clarify. We know of ESOPs. One client of ours is an ESOP, proudly says that, we're an employee-owned company. I'm like, I don't really care. But now we're in this kind of situation. Company for many years, and what I heard you say is that perhaps one of my steps in transition could be to hire my own CEO, put that person in place so I have a full management team in place so that when I step out and sell, in this hypothetical, to the ESOP, the management team is there, and they're my hand-picked people. And I heard you say that I still have a voice in guiding, controlling, which could be as many hours as I want?
Yes.
Okay.
You're controlling the board and you're controlling your schedule.
How long? Because again, I'm selling because I'm tired of working 60 hours a week.
Most people work through their seller note being paid off. But if you want to stay longer, chairman of the board is the best job in the world. You work 4 days a year, and you take a few phone calls in between. And it's a beautiful life.
It's completely up to you.
Yes, so
100% up to you.
real life example. So over the last 5 years, basically what my role looks like is I had already transitioned. Did exactly what you talked about. I put a CEO in place while we were transitioning. And so now my primary job is I meet with him once a month, and then I meet with him as an executive. Like, I want a presentation on the whole company with his leadership team once a month. So I'm literally probably spending 6 hours a month on the company, but I have like a dashboard, so I have all the information I need, and then I can call him anytime I want. And what's good about it is I'm accessible to his team, so they pay me a senior consultant fee to actually be accessible for so many hours a month. And so the board can establish that, and you're the chairman of the board. And so one way to think about it is like for us, we currently have 5 seats on the board and we control 3 of them, if that gives you any insight.
By the way, you can solve that successor CEO variable either before you do the transaction or after. It's totally up to you. I'm going to plow with this, and whoever wants to leave. You're not going to hurt any of our feelings, but I'm going to.
Any other questions? We have one back.
Yeah.
Tom, you mentioned when we were visiting over lunch the other day that this structure is particularly attractive or conducive for M&A activities going forward.
Yes.
Can you expound upon that?
Yes. I'm going to let Brandt answer that question. We see this as being a very key structure for roll-up companies who are looking to roll up other competitor companies for a variety of reasons.
I'm going to do this really, really fast. This is recorded, so we can get you guys the recording on this too. But so when you're going to go sell your company to somebody else, these are the parties to the transaction, right? You've got the buyer. The buyer is always going to borrow against your assets and your cash flow. And so the lender lends the money to the buyer. The buyer buys your stock. Best case scenario. The shareholders or the private equity owners now enjoy ownership of your corporation, and you go off and you pay your tax. 32% is the national average capital gains rate. That's a normal transaction. Nothing exotic or crazy. The only difference between that and the ESOP transaction is you've got this thing called an employee stock ownership plan, employee stock ownership trust that is the buyer that's borrowing the money from that 3-layer wedding cake that I described. Bank, junior lender like Perpetuate, and then below that is a seller note holder where you're going to carry back a seller note for part of it. You don't have to, but you can legally not pay tax on your sale proceeds when you sell to the ESOP if within 12 months you buy U.S. stocks and bonds with your sale proceeds. So very similar to 1031 in real estate, if you guys are familiar with that. A little farther down in the code is 1042. So everybody gets excited about this, and it's great, but what really makes the transaction work is that the taxation on the profits of the business stops. How in the world could that be? How many of you have LLCs or S corps? The majority of you. So you know that those corps don't pay taxes. The profits flow through to you. You pay tax as individual shareholders. If the corporation is an S corp, which it will be, and now it's got one shareholder, and it's a retirement plan called an ESOP that doesn't pay taxes, that is how legally there's thousands of U.S. companies that have legally stopped paying tax on the profits of the business forever. And so Congress gives us that break, and they do it as an inducement for us to sell to the employee trust because there's less layoffs, less local negative impact, local economies, and it's a healthier thing to do, both sides of the aisle. Perhaps the only thing that both sides of Congress agree on is that if you can create more capitalists in our society, that's a good thing. More risk-taking, more taxes will be collected through more business formations. And so it's really a capitalistic solution to wealth inequality, which is why both sides like it. And so in the early years, right, you're going to run the business the way you would normally run it. Maintain your working capital, fund your capital budget. Nothing's different about how you operate the business. You still control the board, and those excess profits that you were taking distributions on and having to pay taxes on don't exist anymore. So those excess profits go down into the trust, and a minute later they go right back out and they pay back the lenders that lent the money to the trust that bought your stock. And so once all that transaction debt has been paid off, it's pretty amazing how much cash builds up in this trust. These guys are nodding because they're far enough down the path to having that transaction debt paid off, and you're not bleeding money to the IRS anymore. A lot of cash builds up here. Anything that the board and the trustee, and by the way, the board hires and fires the trustee at will. The board can be the trustee if they want. Anything that is a good investment on behalf of the plan participants, the employees, you can use the cash in the ESOP to invest in. Real estate, capital equipment, acquisitions, to your question. So what we see very, very often in mature ESOP-owned companies that have paid down that initial transaction debt is use that cash to help solve their competitors' problems, right? So there can be a lot of smaller competitors in your market or across the country that you would love to acquire one day. Well, they have the same problem, right? They have to go figure out how to sell to a private equity group or a strategic buyer, pay tax. They can sell to you, and we structure the transaction where they're selling to your ESOP, and they can avoid paying capital gains tax on the sale proceeds legally. And so that becomes a very, very powerful way to acquire other companies with pre-tax dollars that are building up in that trust, and do it in a way where that target that you're going to acquire, all of his employees are going to be totally blessed by the fact that the guy's selling to your ESOP-owned company, because they're going to be participants, employee owners, and nobody else but you can offer him a deal where he can avoid paying tax on his sale proceeds. So I've done this multiple times, and even when the ESOP-owned company was bidding against private equity groups, the ESOP-owned company always won.
Can I tell a story about a local company here? Have any of you been to Truckee, California, which is literally right up the street here? If you go into Truckee, you go under I-80, you take a right, and on the left, there's a company called Mountain Hardware. You go into Mountain Hardware, and you're going to know you're in someplace special. It's a hardware store. It's a camping store, it's a fishing store, it's a home goods store, and the people are lights out attentive to you as you walk in the door. They are one of the ESOP success stories in America. You go to the ESOP Association in Las Vegas every year, they're getting awards all the time for communication, for all the different pieces and parts of their ESOP that they have excelled at. Well, they now have bought 4 other Ace Hardware stores. We have an Ace Hardware store in Incline Village, which is 20 minutes from here. It was the nastiest Ace Hardware store. People would never help you. Well, Mountain Hardware buys it, they expand it. It is now a camping store, it is now a fishing store, it is now a clothing store, a home goods store, and the people are helpful. It's so much different just because it's now owned as an ESOP. So
I want to leave you with one last thought, and stay as long as you want and ask other questions, but I want to leave you with this one takeaway thought. Most people in America, most of your employees, are not going to go to church. The only way that they're going to hear about the Lord is if they hear about it in a workplace. There are very vibrant companies within FCCI, C12, Convene, other Christian CEO organizations around the country, where thousands of people are coming to Christ every year because of obedient Christian business owners that it could be as simple as having a chaplain on staff. And we're going to see those people in heaven when we get there. That's the good news. The bad news is that the vast majority of the business owners, and just look around, everybody's got gray hair like I do, right? They're all, virtually all of them, baby boomers that have to sell their business. They either have in the last 10 years or they've got to get out in the next 20 demographically because of the baby boom. And way too many of them are getting picked off one by one by secular private equity groups. America is being private equitized, and it's not good. And it's not good spiritually. If we don't do something about this, which is what really drives Tom and I and our investors and to step into the gap and help solve this, current course and speed, we don't save the best and brightest Christian companies in the next 20 years, America looks, because the younger generation is not going to church. The younger generation, I don't see them backfilling with the kind of businesses that you guys run. Some, but not like it was 30, 40 years ago. America looks dramatically different for our grandkids and our great-grandkids 20 years from now. And so this is not a applies to every single company like I began the conversation with, and I understand why most companies Christian companies have chosen to sell to private equity groups in the past, because sometimes you have to get a certain amount of cash, like in Tom's situation. You know, you can't be a saint. Not everybody can afford to be a saint like John and Glenn were. Some people have to get a certain amount of cash. And so, thank the Lord, we have accumulated Christian investors and have further conversations with more of them that see this problem, want to earn the same return that they can return putting money into secular private equity funds as an investment, by the way. Same return, but doing it in this nuanced, unique way, trying to solve a different problem than what secular private equity groups are trying to solve. So we'll just leave you with that encouragement, is how I would put it, so that if a private equity group is approaching you, just come to us, let us show you what you can do on your own with our help to perpetuate the independence and the kingdom impact of that business, and then pray about go get the other bids even, but get educated and get a proposal on what this alternative is now that there's parity in liquidity, and then pray about it. That's our only request.
Just to the side too, you might have already thought of this, but if you decide that an ESOP isn't for you, don't discount the idea of searching out an ESOP in your market sector to sell to that has Christian values aligned with yours as an option to perpetuate the culture you've built.
That's a great point.
I love everything I've heard, and I'm really excited about this. We at Pacific Justice Institute, we work with companies to help them establish policies in their bylaws, et cetera, to institutionalize their faith. And I would love, we do it all without charge. I'd love to work with any clients you have out there that want to really nail down, solidify in the transaction their faith and to nail things down. This is fantastic. I had no idea this existed. So.
John alluded to this. It's called a PDC in Texas. In other states, it's called an E-Corp. You might have heard of it. E-Corp, E-Corp, limited corp. That is not a tax designation like an S-Corp or a C-Corp. Your S-Corp or your C-Corp remains the same, but a B-Corp, a benefit corp, means that you are adopting articles and bylaws. You're adopting articles and bylaws that he can help you with that say this corporation exists in the case of, I know yours, John, to, and I think even yours, Glenn, to glorify God. And so it's not perfect, but it is a prophylactic around the corporation that allows the board, which you guys control, to direct profits to ministry, whatever the board believes is the best use of that money, pursuant to the newly adopted articles and bylaws of the B Corp. It's a way to protect you guys in deflecting profits that would be flushed down the toilet in taxes to the ministry of your choice. Ministries of your choice, so you get to direct where the profits of the business that you are stewarding go to, rather than giving it to the government and letting them allocate it where most of us don't agree.
Hey, Brandt, can I mention one more thing? Sorry. Well, one thing I didn't mention, because it's, but I will, I think, and that is, I donated 10% of the ESOP of the company to a nonprofit. And so that reduced my taxes significantly. So when you look at that 32%, it cut it down, so I was able to pay off all my capital gains on the sale in 1 year's check. It was pretty easy. And now that it's being held by a I'll just say Barnabas Foundation, and they're going to hold it until such time as the ESOP buys out that other 10%.
And
Now,
most Christian sellers will gift part of the stock before the transaction to like a donor advised fund. Pick the Christian foundation that you donate it to. You get a personal tax deduction for the value of the stock that you're donating, and then one of two things happens. We do the transaction. Let's say you gifted 10%. Now you have 90%. Your donor advised fund has 10%. Both shareholders sell to the ESOP in the transaction. That's how you're getting that 10% illiquid stock sold in liquidity up to the donor advised fund to go fund ministry. Or same exact thing, gift it 90%, 10%, I'm just making numbers up. That 10% shareholder, the donor advised fund, does not sell. It hangs out as a shareholder. So now you have an S Corp with two shareholders, an employee trust that doesn't pay taxes, and a 10% shareholder in the form of a donor advised fund that doesn't pay taxes. And by law, we know S Corp shareholders have to get distributions every year, right? Profits. So now you've got a conduit, a 10% corporate tithe, if you will, conduit out of cash flow to the kingdom for as long as you want. A lot of people do. You don't have to, but a lot of people will do that. And that's money that was being flushed to the IRS. It's like taking a drink from a fire hydrant, isn't it?
A lot of companies don't have successors. Their children don't want anything to do with it, and I'm dealing with a client with that, and he asked me if this was an ESOP. We talked this morning. But you mentioned that you would handle, or the ESOP handles that. Where do you pull those people from?
Executive search firms. You have to, you can't legally discriminate and only hire Christian. You can't give the mandate to them that says only show us Christians, but you can throw a big net, find the best CEO, CFO, whatever spot you're trying to fill. And you got some insight here. And you can ask the right kind of questions, and you can discern the right fit from a Christian culture perspective.
I was just going to say, part of our training, we can actually help you to know legally exactly what questions to ask and the approach to take, and how to find out if that person is in fact spiritually what you want. And it's really there's legal ways of doing it. You just have to know what questions are the right questions and the right approach. Love to work with you on that without charge, of course.
Yeah, so it's just going through the same process that private equity groups do to attract talent, do the interview process, and have the board, which you control, hire those people whenever you decide. One more.
So I'm a little biased. So as a second generation family member who loves being involved in the company, how does this control shift or not shift?
Great question. Many family-owned businesses adopt this structure. Remember, the board is controlled by your family for as long as your family wants to. And the board hires and fires management and employees. So really nothing changes in that regard.
Is there a certain size or that your company would be to participate?
For a standalone company, and I'll define what that means, figure 2.5 to 3 million of EBITDA kind of as a minimum. If you're lower than that, if say you're 1 to 1.5 million, somewhere in that range, Tom alluded to it, we've innovated on a structure where if we can bring 2, possibly 3 companies together that collectively get to that 2.5 to 3 million of EBITDA, we've got a structure where the ESOP, it's a holding company, 100% owned by the ESOP. All 3 of those smaller companies are selling to the holding company. And you're getting more cash than you would get if you, on a standalone basis at $1.5 million EBITDA, let's say, sold to a private equity group. So you're going to get more cash, you're going to get all the benefits, but you have to be willing to lock arms with, 2 other members, hopefully FCCI members or other Christian companies in your industry, either in your market or maybe outside of your market. Maybe the 3 of you cover the country better by virtue of that. So there's a way to do that in a roll-up strategy.
And Brandt, the other, that's if you want and need outside capital. On the other side of it, if it's $1 million company, you can do seller financing for 100% of the transaction, and a lot of people do that. They don't want to, do a merger. That's how they can get that done.
Okay, my follow-up, and I think I know the answer to this, is if you were thinking about doing an acquisition, would it be better to do before or after?
After, I would think.
That's what I was guessing.
Well, because once you become an ESOP, then they can convert to an ESOP the day before the acquisition, and they can the seller can benefit from the tax deferral of a 1042. If you do it before, you don't have that benefit to offer the seller of the other company.
Right.
That's one side of the coin. He's right. That's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is you might be able to buy this before the ESOP. You might be able to buy this person for a lower multiple than what you're worth. Say you're worth 5 times EBITDA, and you can buy this company for 2 times EBITDA. I'm just making numbers up. Yeah. Then now you're going to benefit from that you bought them for 3x. You're selling at 5x. That benefit, economic benefit, is going to accrue to you. So it's case by case.
Would it also be instead of to avoid, if you could do the acquisition to avoid the holding company to get it where it needs to be first, would that also be better than trying to do the holding company? Doesn't matter. Okay.
What are potential pitfalls and the downsides?
The ESOP is, it's an amplifier. It's like the speaker, right? It's an amplifier. So it will, when you have everybody rowing the boat the same way, really stoked and excited about the new strategic plan, and they have line of sight on, statistically, employees that work for ESOP-owned companies have like 3.5 times the retirement benefit of non-ESOP-owned companies. It's very materially better. You get them excited about that, and they see that, and that becomes real. That results in higher KPIs in like every empirical study ever done in 40 years on ESOPs. But you stumble, people are more bummed. They care more. When somebody cares more, then they're going to be more bummed if there's a stumble in the business. The ESOP is not a panacea. It doesn't solve for business cyclicality or bad business decisions, right? So the ESOP can amplify those things. The only other thing I would say is that, most of us are used to, we don't have boards. We haven't been operating our business with boards. We have a 401k plan probably in a TPA firm that keeps that in compliance, so we're kind of used to that. But when you go into the ESOP structure, there's a little more formality in board structure, which we help you guys with consulting-wise, no cost. And every year the company's got to get a valuation, and the TPA firm that's keeping you in compliance on your 401k plan is gonna also have to keep your ESOP plan in compliance. So it'll cost you $50,000 more a year in expenses, a fraction of the tax that you would pay, by the way, in those years. But so just a little more formality. I think those are the two key things. I don't know if you guys would add anything different to that.
For me, that was a pretty big deal because I didn't ever have a board. So setting your board up the right way, I think, is really key. You got to make sure that's why we started with 5 people instead of 7, so that we make sure we have the camaraderie there. The other thing I would just add is from history of ours, but also from a lot of people I interviewed, you have to also understand that first 3 to 4 years, the employees really don't understand what an ESOP means. And so you got to just kind of be patient with them and just continue to say the same thing over and over and over and over again for the first 3 or 4 years before they really get it.
Yeah. Then we help you with that. Thank you guys for your interest and your patience and we can hang out for a little longer if necessary. Bless you guys.